There are moments in life when you are simply going about your day, tending your fire, caring for your home, watching the sky shift from gold to gray, and then everything changes. You do not plan for those moments. You do not rehearse for them. You do not imagine on an ordinary afternoon that by nightfall your name will be whispered with reverence, that your small tent on the edge of a valley will become holy ground, that your trembling hands will have done what armies could not. I was not trained for battle. I had no sword at my side, no shield on my arm. I was a woman, a wife, a keeper of the hearth, a weaver of cloth and quiet life. But God does not always choose the mighty to carry out his purposes. Sometimes he chooses the one standing in the doorway, watching and waiting, with only her hands and her courage and the deep, unshakable knowing that this moment, this strange and terrible and holy moment, was made for her. My name is Jael, and this is my story. I want you to know before I begin that I did not act out of hatred. I did not act out of pride or ambition. I acted because God had placed me in the path of something larger than myself, and I chose not to step aside. I chose to stand. There is a kind of bravery that looks nothing like bravery from the outside. It looks like stillness. It looks like hospitality. It looks like a woman pouring milk and laying a blanket gently over a sleeping man. But inside there's a roar. Inside there's a voice that says, "This is the moment. Do not be afraid." I have lived long enough to know that God speaks to us in the most unexpected ways. Not always through thunder and angels and burning bushes. Sometimes he speaks in the quiet conviction that rises in your chest when you least expect it. And on that day, he spoke, and I listened. Come with me. Let me take you back to the beginning. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them yet. I have always loved the morning. There is something about the hour before full sunrise, that in-between time when the sky is caught between night and day, that has always felt sacred to me. The air is cool, everything is still, the world holds its breath, and in that stillness, I used to pray, not with great words or elaborate petitions, just a quiet turning of my heart toward the one who made me. A simple acknowledgement, I am here, you are here, that is enough. My name is Jael, the wife of Heber, the Canaanite. If you are searching for me in the grand stories of my time, you might almost miss me. I am not a queen, not a prophetess, not a woman of renown. I am the wife of a man who pitched his tent far from his people, far from the noise of alliances and politics, in a place called the Plain of Zanaim, near Kedesh. We lived apart. That was my life, the life of a woman on the edges of things. Heber had made a separate peace with the house of Jabin, the Canaanite, king of Hazor. This arrangement made some people look at us with suspicion. Were we loyal? Whose side were we on? I often wondered that myself in the deep quiet of sleepless nights. But I am getting ahead of my story. Let me begin where all stories really begin, not with the events, but with the person. Let me begin with who I was before that night changed everything. I was born into the Canaanite people. We were not Israelites, and yet our history was woven together with theirs in ways that felt like the hand of providence. Our ancestor, the father-in-law of Moses himself, had guided the great prophet through the wilderness. We carried that heritage like a quiet thread of gold running through the fabric of our lives. We were known as skilled craftspeople, especially workers of metal, but we were also known as wanderers, tent dwellers, people who moved through the land rather than settling in it. There was something I understood about that, about living in the in-between. I was never fully belonging to any one world. And yet, even in that uncertain place, I found God, or perhaps He found me. I remember the first time I truly understood that He was real, not as a story I had been told, but as a presence I had felt. I was young, perhaps 12 or 13 years old. There had been a drought that year, the kind of drought that turns the earth to cracked pottery and makes the animals walk slowly with their heads low. Our water jars were nearly empty. My mother's face was tight with worry, though she tried to hide it from us children. I remember sitting outside the tent one evening, watching the horizon for any sign of clouds, and I talked to Him, not out loud, just in my heart. I said something like, "I do not know if you hear me. I do not know if I matter enough for you to listen. But my mother is afraid, and I am afraid. And if you are real, if you truly are what the stories say, then please, please, let the rain come." 3 days later, it rained. I know that rains always come eventually. I know that there are other explanations. But in my heart, something shifted that day. Something that would never quite shift back. I grew up with that quiet certainty tucked inside me like a flame kept out of the wind. And as the years passed and I became a woman, and I became a wife, and I built my life in the tent at the edge of the valley, that flame never went out. Some days it burned brighter than others. Some days when Heber was distant, when loneliness settled over me like morning fog, it barely flickered. But it never went out. Our tent was simple. I want you to see it as I saw it every day. The walls were woven of goat hair, dark and dense, made to withstand the weather. Inside, we kept what we needed and not much more. A mat for sleeping, woven with care. Clay jars of oil and grain, a small grinding stone. The smell of wood smoke and lanolin and earth. I tended the tent with pride. I know that might sound like a small thing, but there is a kind of worship in keeping a home with intention and care. Every morning when I swept the mat clean, when I checked the ropes and stakes that kept the structure sound, when I prepared the food and drew the water, I did these things as an offering, not because I had to, because it was mine to do. Heber was not always easy to live with. He was a man of strong opinions and stronger silences. We did not always understand each other, but we had built a life together and I respected him. And there were moments between us, quiet evenings, a shared meal, the particular tenderness of waking up together in the early morning that I held on to. Marriage is not always what the songs say it is, but it can still be sacred. I lived in that tent for many years, watching the seasons turn, watching the stars rise and set, watching the distant movement of armies on the roads below our hill. We were close enough to see them. We were far enough away to feel safe, or so I thought. The land of Canaan in those days was not a peaceful place. The people of Israel had been living under the oppression of Jabin, the king of Hazor, for 20 years. 20 years. Imagine the weight of that. Imagine living your entire young life under the shadow of an enemy who crushed your people, who made them feel small and hopeless and forgotten. The commander of Jabin's army was a man named Sisera. I had seen him from a distance. He was the kind of man who took up space in the world. Not just physical space, but something else. A presence that preceded him, that made the air feel different. His army was formidable. 900 iron chariots. In an age when iron was power, that number meant something terrible. The Israelites cried out to God, and God heard them. He always hears. He raised up a judge in Israel, a woman named Deborah, a prophetess, a mother of her nation. I had heard stories of Deborah. Even out here, at the edge of things, stories travel. People spoke of her with a kind of awe, this woman who sat under a palm tree and dispensed wisdom and justice to a nation that had nearly forgotten how to hope. I admired her from a distance. I did not know then how our stories were about to intersect. I did not know that God was already weaving together a moment, a place, a woman with a tent peg and trembling hands into his grand design for the deliverance of his people. I was just living my ordinary life, tending the fire, watching the sky, praying in the early morning, and waiting, though I did not know what I was waiting for. There is something I want you to hold on to as you hear this story. You may feel right now like you are living at the edges of things. You may feel like the important stories are happening somewhere else, to someone else, to people more qualified and more visible and more chosen than you. You may feel like your ordinary life, your tent, your routine, your small and quiet faithfulness does not amount to very much. I understand that feeling. I lived with that feeling for years. But God sees the edges. God works at the margins. God is not limited by geography or circumstance or the smallness of our visible lives. He was already at work in me, and He is already at work in you, even now, even in the in-between. Hold on to that. In those days, the sound of war was never far away. Even in our quiet corner of the plain, we could feel it. It was in the way travelers walked past with their eyes low and their pace quick. It was in the hushed conversations at the well. It was in the distant smoke on the horizon that sometimes appeared without explanation. Heber and I did not speak of it often. We had made our peace, literally, with the powers that surrounded us. There were nights when I lay awake and thought about the Israelites, the people of God living under oppression, children growing up without freedom, mothers weeping for sons taken by a cruel army, fathers working land that was not truly theirs. What does it mean to stand apart while your neighbors suffer? I did not have an answer. I only had questions, and the ache that comes from not knowing what you are supposed to do. Then came the news that Deborah had spoken. Word traveled fast when something significant happened. Traders, merchants, shepherds passing through. They carried stories the way they carried goods. And it was through one of these passing voices that I heard what had happened on Mount Tabor. Deborah the prophetess had summoned Barak, a military commander from the tribe of Naphtali, and told him, "God says to you, go. Take 10,000 men, go to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and I will give him into your hands." Barak had hesitated. He had said, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And Deborah had agreed to go. But she had also said something that stopped me when I heard it repeated. She said, The journey you take will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hand of a woman. A woman, she had said it plainly, simply, without drama. A woman would deliver Israel. I heard those words and something moved inside me. I did not know yet what it meant. I did not yet understand that the woman spoken of was me. How could I have known? I was just a tent dweller on the edge of a valley. I had no army, no sword, no army allegiance, but the words settled into me like seeds settling into soil. I did not shake them off. The battle, when it came, was swift and decisive. God moved. God always moves when his people cry out. The Kishon River flooded, some say miraculously, others say by the timing of a heavy rain. Whatever the cause, Sisera's 900 iron chariots became useless in the mud. The great military advantage he had wielded for 20 years was stripped away in a single afternoon. The army of Israel routed the Canaanites. They fled in every direction. And Sisera, the mighty commander, the man who had terrorized a nation, he fled on foot. He abandoned his chariot. He ran. I want you to sit with that image for a moment. This man who had wielded such power over others. This man whose name made people lower their voices and their eyes. This man with 900 iron chariots running on foot, alone. Power built on oppression is always more fragile than it appears. It depends on the silence and the fear of others. And when those things crack, when people rise up, when God moves, the whole structure can fall in an afternoon. I did not see the battle, but I saw what came after it. I was outside the tent. The day had been strange. The air felt charged, the way it sometimes does before a storm. I had been restless all morning, unable to settle to any task. I had prayed more than usual in fragments, just little turnings of my heart toward God, not sure what I was asking for, only sure that I needed to be paying attention. And then I saw him. A man coming across the open ground from the direction of the valley, running but unevenly, stumbling, exhausted, the gait of someone who had been running for hours. His clothing was fine, finer than a common soldier's. His face was haggard with fear and exertion. I knew who he was. I cannot fully explain how I knew. I had never been this close to him before. But something in the bearing of him, even in his desperate flight, told me this was no ordinary soldier. This was Sisera. And in the same instant that I knew who he was, I knew what I had to do. That is the only way I can describe it. Not a long deliberation, not a careful weighing of options. A knowing, clear and sudden and complete, like a lamp being lit in a dark room. God had brought him here, to my tent, to me. Why here? Why me? I have thought about that question for the rest of my life. I think, and I cannot be certain, I only know what I experienced. I think that God uses what is already in place. Eber's arrangement with Jabin meant that Sisera would not fear approaching our tent. He would have seen our camp as a safe house, a place of neutrality, a place where he could rest without threat. The very thing that it had made me feel complicit in the suffering of others, our alliance with the enemy, God now turned into the instrument of deliverance. He does that sometimes. He takes the things we feel most conflicted about, the places where we have been most uncertain of our own righteousness, and he redeems them. He uses them. not in spite of the complexity, but through it. I stepped toward him. I called out, "Turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me. Do not be afraid." My voice was calm. I did not feel calm. Inside, my heart was hammering. My hands were ice cold. My legs felt uncertain beneath me, but my voice was calm because I knew. Because the Lord had told me, in the way He sometimes tells us, not in words, but in the deep conviction of the soul, that this moment belonged to Him, and I was simply the vessel. Sisera stumbled toward me. He was desperate. He was past caring about propriety or caution. He had one instinct left: survive. And I opened the tent to him. I want to pause here for a moment and acknowledge how strange this was. Receiving a man into your tent alone as a woman, this was not the custom of the day. It was not considered proper. It could be misunderstood. It was a transgression of the ordinary rules. But ordinary rules sometimes have to yield to extraordinary purposes. There are moments when God calls us to step outside the boundaries of what is expected, what is comfortable, what is safe, to act in obedience to something larger. I stepped outside those boundaries. I brought him in. "Come in," I said. "Do not be afraid." And again, I said those words for his ears, but I think maybe I was also saying them to myself. "Do not be afraid, Jael. Do not be afraid." He was shaking when he came inside, not the shaking of cold, the shaking of a man whose world had collapsed underneath him. Sisera sank onto the mat and looked up at me with eyes that were emptied by fear and exhaustion. All the power had drained out of him. He was not, in that moment, the fearsome commander who had oppressed a nation. He was just a man, frightened, running, and somehow that made what I had to do both easier and harder. Easier because the threat he posed seemed diminished. Harder because there is something in the human heart that responds to vulnerability with compassion. I did not let myself linger in that compassion. He spoke first. He said, "Give me some water to drink, for I am thirsty." I opened a skin of milk, cool, rich milk, and I gave it to him. More than he had asked for. Comfort, not just sustenance. And then I covered him with a rug, a heavy covering, warm and soft. I tended to him as I would have tended to any guest. This is the part of the story that I think people sometimes misunderstand. They think the hospitality was a trick, but it was not. It was genuine care offered in the moment to a human being who was exhausted and afraid. God had not told me to be cruel to him, or cold, or withholding. He had simply told me that Sisera's time was up, the means were mine to choose, and I chose mercy in the small things, even as I carried out the larger purpose. Sisera gave me one instruction before his eyes closed. He said, "Stand at the door of the tent. If anyone comes and asks you, 'Is there a man here?' say, 'No.'" He wanted me to protect him. He had appointed me his guard. He had trusted me. I said nothing in reply. I only watched as his breathing slowed, as his exhausted body surrendered to the sleep it could no longer resist. I stood at the entrance of the tent. I watched him sleep, and I prayed. "God, is this truly what you want? Is this truly the moment?" I was not doubting his sovereignty. I was not looking for an escape. I was simply a woman standing at the threshold of something enormous, wanting to be sure, wanting to hear his voice one more time. The confirmation did not come as a sound. It came as a settling. a deep, peaceful settling in my spirit, the way water settles after it has been disturbed. This is right. This is the moment I have made for you. Do not be afraid. I turned back to look at him. He was sleeping deeply now, the kind of sleep that comes after extreme terror and exhaustion, total, unguarded, complete surrender. I knew this was the moment. I moved quietly. I picked up the tent peg and I picked up the mallet. These were tools I knew. I had driven tent pegs into the ground 100 times, 1,000 times. The motion was as familiar to me as breathing. The weight of the mallet in my hand was not strange. Only the purpose was different. I knelt beside him. My hands were steady. That surprised me afterward. That in that moment, that terrible, pivotal, history-altering moment, my hands were steady. I think that was grace. I believe God steadied them because it was not my strength in that moment. It was His. I placed the tent peg. I drove it down with one swift, decisive blow, and it was finished. Sisera, the commander of the armies of Jabin, the oppressor of Israel for 20 years, he died in my tent at my hands. A woman's hands. I sat back on my heels. I do not know how long I stayed there. Time felt different in those moments. Thick, slow, without clear edges. I breathed. I was still trembling, though the act was done. I wept a little, not from regret, not from sorrow, but from the sheer enormity of what had just happened. From the weight of being an instrument of something I could not fully comprehend. God was with me. I could feel that, even then, especially then. There are moments in the spiritual life that are beyond ordinary categories of right and wrong and comfortable and uncomfortable. Moments that stand outside the normal rules of how we think about things. This was one of those moments. I'm not asking you to fully understand it. I am only asking you to believe that God was present in it. That the God who had heard a little girl pray for rain, who had kept a flame burning in my heart through years of ordinary life, was with me in the most extraordinarily moment of my life. He did not abandon me there. He was there. He's always there. Shortly after, I heard footsteps outside. I recognized the voice. It was Barak, the commander of Israel's army, who was pursuing Sisera. I stepped out of the tent to meet him. I said simply, "Come. I will show you the man you're looking for." And I let him inside. I watched Barak's face as he took in what he saw. It was a complicated moment for him, I think. Victory, yes. But also the humbling realization that the glory of this victory, the final decisive act, had not belonged to him. It had belonged to a woman, as Deborah had said. As God had ordained, I thought of her words again, "The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hand of a woman." I had heard those words and not fully understood them. Now I did. I want to say something here to you directly before we move into the next part of this story. What I did that night was not the act of someone who had it all figured out. I did not wake up that morning as a hero. I was afraid. I was uncertain. I had my doubts and my trembling, but I took the next step, and then the next. And God met me in each step. That is what faith looks like, not fearlessness, not perfect certainty. Just the willingness to take the next step and trust that He is already there ahead of you. You will have your moment. Maybe you already have. Maybe it is coming. And when it does, you do not have to have it all together. You just have to be willing to move. He will steady your hands. The morning after was very quiet. I remember that so clearly. The sounds of battle had faded from the valley below. The roads that had been choked with fleeing soldiers were empty. The smoke was clearing, and I sat outside my tent in the early light, in the silence, and I tried to understand who I was now. Things had shifted, not just in the world, though they had. The oppressor was dead. The army of Israel had won a decisive victory. Jabin's power was broken. The people of God were free. But something had shifted in me as well. Have you ever experienced a moment that divides your life into before and after? This was that moment for me. Before, I was the woman on the edges, unremarkable, peripheral, a tent dweller on a plain. After, I was still all of those things. But now I carried the knowledge of what God had done through me. And that knowledge changed the way I saw everything. It changed the way I saw myself. I spent a long time in the days and weeks that followed sitting with the question, why me? Not as a complaint, but as a genuine wondering. I was not the most skilled. I was not the most brave. I was not the most trained or the most prepared. I was simply the one who was there, and I was the one who said yes. I have come to believe that this is one of the deepest truths about how God works. He does not wait for us to be fully ready. He does not require us to have all our doubts resolved before He calls us. He calls us in the middle of our ordinary lives. He calls us in our uncertainty and our fear. He calls us when we are standing at the edge of something we do not fully understand. And He says, will you take the next step? And the only question that matters is whether we say yes. Deborah sang a song. I heard it later, carried on the lips of travelers. It was a song of praise and triumph, and it named me. She sang about me. She called me, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. I wept when I heard those words for the first time, not from pride, from wonder. That this woman, this prophetess, this mother of Israel, this voice of God to a nation, had seen me, had named me, had included me in the story of what God had done. I was not invisible. I had never been invisible to Him. And even though it took a great and dramatic moment to make that visible to others, the truth had always been the same. He sees the ones on the margins. He values the tent dwellers and the in-between people and the women who have been living faithful, quiet lives in places no one pays attention to. He sees them. He uses them. He sings about them. I thought about my life differently after that. I thought about all those years of what had felt like ordinariness. All those mornings of prayer, all those faithful small acts of keeping a home, welcoming strangers, doing the next right thing with no recognition and no applause. Nothing had been wasted, not one prayer, not one moment of faithfulness, not one morning of turning my heart toward God in the dark. All of it had been preparation. Preparation for a moment I never saw coming. This is what I want to say to you, deeply and earnestly. If you are in a season of what feels like ordinary life, your ordinary is not small. Your faithfulness in the hidden places is not unnoticed. God is preparing you, not just for one big moment, though perhaps that too, but for a life of being present and willing and available to Him. The preparation is not separate from the purpose. The preparation is part of the purpose. Every morning you choose to turn toward God even when you don't feel like it. Even when the prayers feel dry and the silence feels empty, you are driving a tent peg of faithfulness into the ground of your life. Every time you choose integrity in a small thing, every time you extend hospitality to someone who cannot repay you, every time you hold the flame of trust alive in a difficult season, you are becoming the person God can use. I also spent time thinking about the valley that stood between my story and Deborah's story, the gap between someone called to lead and someone called to act. Deborah was remarkable, prophetic, wise, brave, public. I was none of those things, and yet our stories were part of the same story. We needed each other in a sense. Not personally, we barely knew each other, but our roles complemented each other in the plan of God. The prophet declares the word. The ordinary woman acts on it, and together they bring deliverance. This is how the body of God's people works. Not just the visible leaders and the public voices, also the hidden ones, the quiet ones, the ones in the tents on the edges of the valleys, all of us together carrying out what God has purposed. I thought about Heber too, my husband. He was not part of this. He had not been there. He had made his arrangements with Jabin, and now those arrangements were rendered meaningless by what had happened. How did he feel about what I had done? I cannot speak for him, but I know this. He could not have stopped it, even if he had been there, because the moment belonged to God, not to any human arrangement or alliance or plan. God had his purpose, and he carried it out. Even through the complicated, messy realities of a marriage and an alliance and a woman who had not always been sure which side she was on, he works through the complications. He's not stopped by our messy, complicated lives. He enters right into the middle of them, and he does something beautiful. There is another thing I learned in the silence of those days after. I learned what it meant to hold two things at once. The gravity of what I had done. A man had died by my hand, and the conviction that God had purposed it. I did not resolve that tension by pretending the gravity was not there. I sat with it. I wept over it. And the first held it alongside the other truth, that God is sovereign and his purposes are higher than mine. And sometimes we are called to do things that are far beyond our ordinary categories. I'm not asking you to understand this fully, but I'm asking you to trust that God knows what he is doing, even when you cannot see it, even when the things he asks of you feel beyond you, even when the morning after leaves you sitting in the quiet trying to understand. He knows. He is still good. Trust him. Years have passed since that night. The landscape has changed. The people of Israel lived in freedom for 40 years after the battle at the Kishon River. 40 years of peace, purchased in part by the faithfulness of Deborah and Barak and the army that trusted God, and a tent dweller on a plain. My life returned to something like ordinary after that. I tended my tent. I kept my fire. I prayed in the early mornings. But the ordinariness felt different now. It felt charged with meaning. I knew, in a way I had not fully known before, that ordinary faithfulness is never actually ordinary. That the small, repeated, quiet acts of a life lived toward God are the very substance of what he uses. I want to close this story by speaking directly to you, wherever you are right now. Whatever your tent looks like, whatever planes you are pitched on, whatever ordinary life you are living, I want to say, I see you. And more importantly, God sees you. You may have been told by circumstances or by other people or by the quiet voice of your own doubts that your life does not matter in the grand scheme of things, that the important work is happening somewhere else, to someone else. But I'm living proof that God disagrees. He chose me, a Canaanite woman, a tent dweller, someone who is living at the edges of the story of his people. He chose me for a moment that would be remembered forever, and he did not choose me because I was remarkable. He chose me because I was available, because I said yes, because I trusted him in the small things year after year, until the day came when the small things became a very large thing. That day may come for you too, or perhaps it already has, and you have not fully recognized it yet. Perhaps the greatest work you are doing right now is not dramatic at all. Perhaps it is the patient, faithful, steady work of raising a child with love, of showing up for a friend in need, of keeping your integrity when no one is watching, of praying in the dark when you don't feel like it. Perhaps you are driving tent pegs of faithfulness into the ground of your life every single day, and God sees everyone. I think about what it means to be a woman of faith now that I have had years to reflect on it. It does not mean being fearless. It means being willing to be afraid and act anyway. It does not mean having all the answers. It means trusting the one who does. It does not mean being perfectly prepared. It means being present and available and willing to say yes when God speaks. There is a phrase that I have come to love, though I do not know if I can explain exactly why. God is a God of the in-between. He meets us in the liminal spaces, the edges, the margins, the places between the big known things where ordinary life unfolds. That is where I met him. That is where he used me. That is where he will meet you. Do not despise the in-between seasons of your life. Do not resent the waiting, the preparation, the ordinary days that seem to lead nowhere. They are leading somewhere. He's already working. He's already weaving together the threads of your story into something larger than you can see from where you are standing. Trust the weaver. Trust the one who sees the whole tapestry when you can only see the threads. I have one more thing to say before I let you go. It is about courage. True courage, I have learned, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more than your fear. For me, on that night, what mattered more than my fear was this: God had purposed this moment, and I did not want to miss it. I did not want to step aside from the work he had prepared for me out of timidity or self-protection or the desire to keep my life uncomplicated. I wanted to be faithful, even if faithful looked strange. What does courage look like in your life? Maybe it looks like having a hard conversation you have been avoiding. Maybe it looks like stepping forward for something you feel completely unqualified for. Maybe it looks like trusting God with a situation that terrifies you. Maybe it looks like getting up tomorrow morning and choosing faith again, even though yesterday was hard. Courage looks different for every person, every season, every calling, but the foundation is always the same. He is trustworthy. He has purposed good things for you. He goes before you. He steadies your hands. You do not have to be ready. You just have to be willing. My name is Jael. I was a tent dweller on a plane, and God used my ordinary hands for an extraordinary purpose. He will use yours too. Trust him. Step forward. Do not be afraid. The story he is writing through your life is more beautiful than, and it is not finished yet. Lord, I pray for everyone who has listened to this story today. I pray that you would stir in their hearts the same quiet conviction you stirred in mine. The knowing that you see them, that you are with them, that you have purpose for their ordinary, faithful, beautiful lives. Give them the courage to say yes when you call. Give them the confidence that comes not from their own strength, but from yours. Steady their hands, Lord, as you steadied mine, and let them really know that they are not on the edges of your story. They are right in the middle of it. Amen. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them.